Thank you very much and good morning. It's a real pleasure for me to participate in what I hope will turn into a discussion soon. Let me just share a few words on what I've been working on over the past 4 years since I was elected into the European Parliament after a campaign that did mostly take place with the help of social media because I was an outsider into politics. And since then I've been working mostly from the perspective of the role that Europe can and should play in the world, as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, as a member of the International Trade Committee, and as a member of the Culture Committee, where throughout all my work I focus a lot on the work that new technologies and technology play in relation to foreign affairs, whether it's human rights, whether it's trade, whether it's development, or whether it's the enlargement policy of the European Union. That is really a central theme in my work here, as I believe that technologies have had a revolutionary change and continue to have a revolutionary change on the lives of people, our economies, and the way we access information and culture all over the world. In the past 4 years, I've also had an opportunity to travel to most countries that are in North Africa and the Middle East, and I've seen with my own eyes, on the one hand, the difference between the situation before the uprisings and after, and the challenge of going from an energy, an environment of promise, of hope, of breakthrough and anticipation of a new day, to the sinking in of reality, growing concerns and in some cases downright fear for what may happen in the transition period and whether there's actually progress being made or whether there are also limitations on the rights, liberties and opportunities of all people living in countries from Tunisia to Egypt. And of course we're not even speaking yet of the horrible situation in Syria, which is of course on the top of our minds in terms of the need to end the crushing of the population, to end the brutal violence by the Assad regime. In Iran, there will be elections in a couple of weeks. We already see intense repression of media, even more than we've seen systematically in that country. And we've been watching with great interest, but also concern, the situation in Turkey over the past week. The question in relation to all these uprisings, these movements, is of course what can and what should the European Union do? On the one hand, I think we have come to a point of realization that our policies thus far, for the past decades by and large, had been too much focused on our alleged interests, on the interest of maintaining stability, relations from government to government, and also concerns about, for example, quote-unquote, managing migration. And I do think that there has been a realization that we should turn to a much more values-based approach in our relations with countries to our southern borders. But the question is, how far are we willing to go? And this is where I'm very, very critical. The new strategy towards North Africa and the Middle East can be summarized on the basis of the more for more principles. You may have heard other people talking about it. It sounds very logical. The idea is that more reforms towards democracy, the rule of law, respect for human rights and minorities would be rewarded or met with more market access, more assistance from the European Union towards these societies in transition. And I think the principle of creating incentives and rewarding those leaders who take responsibility to build inclusive, democratic, pluralist and free societies is a great idea on paper. But of course the question is, how is it going to be implemented in practice? And here I think we're really still struggling as a European Union. A few key examples I think were moments where we were presented with a real test of whether our approach had changed. In November of last year, when President Morsi of Egypt proposed unprecedented powers for himself, it came 1 week after High Representative Ashton had traveled to Egypt and had promised an assistance package of 5 billion euros. And what did the European Union say after the power grab of President Morsi? Nothing. The first report that came out, or the first statement that came out, was actually probably already in the pipelines, probably already planned, and dealt with the return of frozen assets, which of course should be returned to the people as soon as possible. But is that the message you want to give after an unprecedented power grab in one of the key countries where transition is taking place? My answer to that is no. I think that the EU should be much more focused on practicing what it preaches, and this also relates to how we are helping create environments in which journalists can do their work, whether it is in working with more, let's say, traditional media, or whether it is in terms of safeguarding a free and open environment where people can work with new technologies. I'll highlight one more example before I close my introductory thoughts. But since I came here in 2009, I've noticed not only the way in which new technologies, as also my colleague Ms. Pak referred to, have helped people assemble and associate online, freely express themselves, access information, document and share human rights abuses, but certainly also the way in which governments have used new technologies for mass surveillance, mass censorship, tracking and tracing of journalists, dissidents, students, and any citizen basically who had the guts to be critical vis-à-vis the government. And the examples that we know are horrifying. People that were dragged out of their homes after their laptops had been seized, eavesdropping on mobile phones and social media activity, people that had been tortured for their passwords, and the list of horrible examples goes on and on. And the question is, where do the technologies come from that are used by these governments to repress people? Who is actually fabricating these digital arms? Mostly, these companies are based in the United States and in the European Union. So I believe this too falls in the category of practicing what we preach. We have to have regulation that addresses the production and export of what I believe are digital arms to countries not only in North Africa and the Middle East, not only to countries in transition, but to anywhere in the world really, where we have to do a much better job of assessing the technologies and their specific characteristics on the one hand, but also the context within which they're going to be used. If we have assessed on a political level that there is no rule of law in a certain country, then it cannot be that we are unlimited in allowing for the export of lawful intercept technologies, which can basically be used to open a permanent backdoor in the technologies you and I are all using. So I'll end with that. I think it is essential that the EU becomes much more of a leader in a rapidly changing world, in reaching out and creating rights, freedoms and opportunities for a young generation, specifically in our southern neighbourhood. And we've probably been quite distracted by the crisis in our own economy. That's a very, very serious issue, but we should be under no illusion. The world is not waiting for the EU to come out of the crisis situation. The stakes and the interests are very high, and I think we should deliver on the promise that we've made to the people of societies in transition, not to the governments necessarily, that more for more means something, that reforms will be met with market access and stronger partnerships, but that more for more also means less for less. And if there's no real commitment to human rights and the rule of law, that should have consequences as well.